What's going on, guys? This is Rob, and we are back with the 10 Lives of Wolverine. We had to get caught up on this, right? We're a little behind. I think we're like one issue behind on the 10 lives and 10 deaths of Wolverine. So we'll get caught up this week or next week, whatever it is. But nonetheless, right? I mean, the series they're basically done, I think, at this point. We got like one or two more issues of each, and then that's basically it. But what this does, right? This one picks up, again, with the 10 Lives of Wolverine. We're really kind of jumping back and forth through time in terms of like these seminal moments in Wolverine's history. And this one in particular deals with Wolverine when he was under the control of Carol Hines, Professor Thornton, and Abraham Cornelius during the whole Weapon X project thing, right? So when he was basically was really being experimented on, being weaponized, and ultimately having adamantium bonded to his skeleton. But one of the things that happens here is that Abraham Cornelius, when he's examining the blood sample of Wolverine, ends up seeing a kind of strange parasite that he's not really familiar with, which we know is basically Venom. Now, for those of you guys who aren't really familiar with this, during the Donny Cates run on Venom, and one of the reasons why it was so cool is because you had this Web of Venom miniseries, and what it was designed to do was to actually inject different aspects of the Venom mythology throughout the entirety of Marvel Comics. That where the traditional concept was that the Venom symbiote was just a suit that Peter Parker found during the events of Secret Wars, brought it back to Earth, cast it off, then it bonded itself to Eddie Brock, and it just been that way ever since. That with Donny Cates' run, he actually introduced this idea of like the King in Black and the Grendel, different things along those lines, that the symbiotes themselves, building on what Bendis had done in Planet of the Symbiotes, had been around for quite some time, and it actually existed on Earth at some point in time. What you also got was the idea of like basically Venom super soldiers, or like Grendel super soldiers, really what they were, more like symbiote soldiers, but that Wolverine had been one of those or been exposed to the Venom symbiote at some point in time. And so that's why you have these aspects of the symbiote here, because what it means is that he was at one point a host. It was a pretty cool concept, right? Wolverine becoming Venom. But as this happens, as Abraham Cornelius is looking through all this, suddenly Omega Red seizes control of him. Because remember, Wolverine's mind is being sent into the past by Professor Xavier and Jean Grey in order to ensure the survival of Professor X and to make sure nobody assassinates him. But at the same time, you had the mind of Omega Red, which was also sent into the past by Mikhail Rasputin using the Cerebro sword, essentially a weaponized version of Cerebro technology that can send the mind into the past as well. And so essentially Omega Red is trying to assassinate Xavier and Wolverine's trying to stop him, just their minds are being transferred to different people. And so the result of this is that basically Omega Red's like, I'm gonna kill you, bro. And essentially tries to destroy Wolverine, because in his mind it makes the most rational sense that if he can somehow destroy Wolverine before he ever had adamantium bonded to his skeleton, then in effect it could basically make it easier to destroy Wolverine entirely, right? Like he doesn't have to contend with like the adamantium laced skeleton and having to face off against that, because so long as a single sample of Wolverine's DNA continues to exist, potentially he can make a return. It just kind of depends on how his healing factor is handled, right? It depends on who's writing the story. But again, you end up kind of jumping forward basically to World War II, when you ended up having like those kamikaze soldiers who were like flying their planes into American vessels, right? The Japanese were. And then you also have Wolverine, who's basically trying to counter that. Then you switch to Colombia, right? Back in the 1960s and 70s, when you had Wolverine operating as Team X and was ultimately possessed by Omega Red himself for the purpose of trying to kill Xavier. The difference here though is that because at this point in time when he was on Team X, he was on this team alongside Sabretooth and like Mastodon and those guys, is actually a fight between himself and Sabretooth, but with Wolverine being possessed by Omega Red. Now, under any other circumstance, this fight would be riveting, right? It would be just absolutely fascinating, because any of you guys who have been reading X-Men comics for any measure of time, you guys know the most savage version of Sabretooth was Sabretooth in like 1980s comics, right? Like I tell people that all the time. He was almost animalistic in nature. I mean, it was just brutal how hardcore he was. Marvel's toned him down a lot over the course of the last like 30 or 40 years. They've done a lot to change him, right? They've made him far more calm and far less ruthless than he used to be. But having someone like Omega Red, right, who is and really can be every bit as brutal and sadistic as Sabretooth can, fighting Sabretooth, man, it would just make for an epic battle here right now. Instead, we do get something that's kind of interesting when Omega Red actually beseeches Sabretooth and says, hey, no, help me kill Charles Xavier. Now, one thing to keep in mind is that at this point in his life, Sabretooth doesn't know who Xavier is. He doesn't know the significance of Charles Xavier. He's never met him. As far as he's aware, it's just that guy over there in a wheelchair. He doesn't understand why this guy matters at all. He doesn't understand why Wolverine wants to kill him in the first place. Doesn't even know what's going on with him having that weird Omega symbol on his head, right? right? You know, Wolverine's got the Omega sanction, right? Whatever it is. He just doesn't quite grab it. But switching back over to the Weapon X facility, as you have Omega Red trying to destroy Wolverine while he's still in the tank being experimented on, suddenly the Venom symbiote manifests, and when it does, it overtakes Wolverine, it turns him into one of the Grendel, and then in turn, it goes after Abraham Cornelius as he's possessed by Omega Red. Now, of course, this leads to Omega Red basically abandoning the body, but because of, at this point, essentially Wolverine's just basically feral, right? I mean, just kind of operating under the control of this Grendel and just attacking everything in sight, basically, Abraham Cornelius being the thing that he sees. But this is what's cool here, right? Because when you look at this story, and one of the things that makes it so unique is that there is a bit of rewriting going on in terms of the history of Wolverine. And one of the big questions you have to ask here is, how is this going to impact current storytelling regarding the character of Wolverine? The Web of Venom introduced the idea of Wolverine having had the Grendel at some point along the line, and that was really kind of it. There really wasn't a whole lot to do there, and even here, there's not a whole lot of significance there. But take, for example, Sabretooth. Sabretooth does have his current ongoing series right now in Marvel Comics, but if what you had here is a situation that deviated from the traditional timeline, which is to say that Wolverine and Sabretooth and those guys on Team X were in Columbia around the same time that Xavier was there, they just didn't really realize that he was there at that point in time. Things would just kind of continue on the way that they always did, right? They would have completed their mission, they would have been brought back to the Weapons Plus facility, their mind would have been turned to scrambled eggs, they would have been given new memories, and would have been sent forward from there, right? Like basically everything you saw from Bucky Barnes and Captain America in the Winter Soldier film, right? Like that's what they would have done to Team X. Instead, what you have now is a whole different set of events where you have Wolverine here who is essentially just possessed by Omega Red. And while Sabretooth doesn't fully understand what's going on, it's not the way that things are supposed to be. So the question to ask here is this something that's going to play a role in the future of Wolverine and Sabretooth stories in Marvel Comics? I have to believe the answer is yes, right? I have to believe that is going to be the case. But regardless, when you pick up with these different scenarios, right? So Lieutenant Xavier, like Professor Xavier's seemingly his father during the events of World War II, when he was just a lieutenant on an aircraft carrier, and that one of these, that Sabretooth controlling one of these kamikaze Japanese pilots is going to crash into the ship and try to kill Professor X. Wolverine basically saving him. Wolverine's able to save the day there, right? He's able to prevent Lieutenant Xavier from being killed, thereby ensuring Professor Xavier's survival. That when you pick up with the scene where you have him and Sabretooth fighting, that Sabretooth actually just literally tears in to Wolverine himself. That when you also have the scene where you have Abraham Cornelius and everything going on with Wolverine, that this could very well be a kind of bookend explanation as to how it is Wolverine was able to break out of the Weapons Plus facility in the first place, as opposed to the traditional history that we'd seen, which was him just kind of breaking through his bonds, just kind of, being lucid, even if only for a brief amount of time, and making his escape that way. Marvel seemingly kind of rewriting his history a little bit, but in this moment when Sabretooth and Wolverine are fighting, that Sabretooth just rips his heart out and then consumes it, and in doing so, basically ends up defeating Wolverine. But there's also aspects of this that are a little important. That one of the things that Wolverine says here is that particularly with this Japanese pilot, he says, as long as I stay broken, the world stays broken. In the kamikaze attack, Kenji failed to die honorably, and his obsession with shame and revenge gave rise to Lady Deathstrike. He says, ultimately, the symbiote couldn't be weaponized because it couldn't be trained and controlled. So Dr. Cornelius tried dosing me up with adamantium instead. Sabretooth killed me and dragged me back to Team X for reprogramming, and in doing so, he saved Professor X. The clock spins, but it always ends up on the same damn numbers. The more I fight, the more everything seems to stay the same. Unless I'm missing something, unless in the constant spinning of the clock, I've gotten dizzy, and this time, it's actually different, right? This is really like seemingly Benjamin Percy and Marvel telling us, we're rewriting the history of Wolverine. We're rewriting some of these significant moments. What bearing that will have, I have no clue. I mean, it doesn't really look like anything that's happening in this story in terms of changing Wolverine's history is of particular significance, but it's one of those things where it opens the door, right? That door's cracked now, and all it would take was for a writer to come in and just bust that door wide open, and suddenly we have retcons on Wolverine's entire history. I mean, that's what Daniel Way did, right? In the aftermath of House of M, when Wolverine got all his memories back, we got Wolverine Origins by Daniel Way, and he literally retold the story of Wolverine. It was a wholesale reworking of the Wolverine mythos, and it was pretty cool, I think, although not everybody loved Wolverine Origins. But the important thing here is that with Wolverine's heart being ripped out, that seemingly basically he's dead, right? Like his physical form is dead and somebody's kind of blocking it, right? I mean, his physical form at that point is gone, but his mind seemed to have gone with it. But the reality here is that's not truly the case. Instead, what's happened here is somebody has wrestled control of Wolverine away from Jean Grey and Professor Xavier. And when the question's asked, right, Xavier basically uses his mind and realizes, like, I'm sensing like something else is going on here. Wolverine, can you hear me? That Wolverine plunges its claws directly through Professor Xavier, and that's when you end up finding out that was Mikhail Rasputin's entire goal this whole time, was to basically find a way in, to override the control that Jean Grey and Professor X had over Wolverine, and then seize control of Wolverine for himself, which he's successfully done. And in essence, it looks like he'll achieve his goal of killing Professor Xavier. But with that being said, guys, we're gonna bring this video to an end. I'm excited to see how this ends, right? I think we have like maybe 1 or 2 issues, I can't remember. Maybe it's 2. I think maybe it's a 6-issue series. But regardless, thank you all for watching, and I will catch you all later. Peace.